My mother screamed I owed her everything. She destroyed my garden over $5. I evicted her. But last night, she broke in and left something terrifying behind. I own a small house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, a cozy place with a garden I've poured my heart into. My name's Emily, and at 32, I've worked hard to make this house my own. It's a modest 2-bedroom with a wraparound porch, the kind of place you'd see in a feel-good movie, except my story's been anything but that lately. My parents, David and Susan, have been renting it from me for $500 a month, a steal compared to market rates around here. I set the price low to help them out. Dad's retired, living off a fixed pension, and Mom, well, she's never been one for holding down a job. The deal was simple. They'd cover the mortgage, and I wouldn't make a cent of profit. It felt like the right thing to do for family, even if my relationship with Mom has always been a tightrope walk. Susan's always had a way of turning small things into battles. She's the kind of person who sees every request as a personal attack, every boundary as a challenge to her control. Growing up, I learned to tiptoe around her moods, but owning the house flipped our dynamic. Suddenly, I was the one setting rules, and she hated it. Dad's quieter, always trying to keep the peace, but even he couldn't soften her edges. Last month, I had to break the news that the rent would go up by $5. It wasn't greed. Insurance costs had spiked, and I was barely covering the house's upkeep. I braced myself for pushback, but I never expected the storm that was coming. That $5 would unravel everything, exposing the cracks in our family I'd tried so hard to ignore. I stood in the living room of my Portland house, the scent of fresh paint still lingering from last summer's renovations. My heart raced as I faced Susan, my mother, her eyes blazing with a fury I'd seen too many times before. $5? She shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You're bleeding us dry, Emily, you greedy little... She didn't finish the sentence, but the venom in her tone hit like a slap. I tried to explain, my voice steady but firm, that the $5 increase was just to cover rising insurance costs. It wasn't about profit, it was about keeping the house afloat. But Susan wasn't hearing it. Her face twisted, red with rage, and she jabbed a finger at me. This is my house. You owe me for everything I've done for you. Before I could respond, she stormed toward the garden, my garden, the one I'd spent years tending, with roses I'd planted after buying the house. I'll rip it all out, she screamed, grabbing a trowel from the porch. I lunged forward, heart pounding, and caught her arm just as she raised it to strike. Susan, stop, I yelled, my voice cracking. She spun, her free hand swinging toward my hair, fingers grazing my scalp before I pulled back. You can't evict me, she spat, her eyes wild. I'm your mother. I stepped back, chest heaving, and told her to calm down or talk to a lawyer. You're a tenant, Susan. You signed the lease. Her glare could have burned the house down, but I turned and walked away, my hands shaking, knowing this was only the beginning. The weeks after that confrontation felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Susan didn't let the $5 rent increase go. Instead, she escalated things beyond anything I could have imagined. I got a call from a lawyer's office in downtown Portland, informing me that my own mother was suing me. She claimed I had no right to raise the rent, that the house was hers because she'd lived there, because she was my mother. My stomach dropped as I read the legal papers, her signature scrawled at the bottom like a declaration of war. Over $5. It felt like a bad dream, but the court date was real, set for a gray morning at the Multnomah County Courthouse. In the courtroom, Susan played the victim to perfection. She stood before the judge, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion, claiming I'd betrayed her, that I owed her for raising me. After all I've done, she's squeezing me for money, she cried, dabbing her eyes. I sat there, my lawyer beside me, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands clenched the edge of my seat as I listened to her twist the truth. But the lease was ironclad $500 a month, with a clause allowing adjustments for rising costs. I presented the insurance bills, the numbers cold and clear. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, wasn't swayed by Susan's theatrics. A lease is a lease, Mrs. Carter, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The case was dismissed, the rent increase upheld. I should have felt relief, but as Susan stormed out, her face a mask of fury and humiliation, my chest tightened. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about her need to dominate every situation. I caught Dad's eye as he followed her out, his shoulders slumped, his face heavy with exhaustion. He'd tried to stay neutral, but I knew he was caught in the middle. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words. Betrayed, owed. They cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I thought the worst was over, but Susan was just getting started, and the betrayal I felt then was nothing compared to what was coming. A few days after the courtroom loss, I got a frantic call from my neighbor, Mrs. Larson, her voice shaky. Emily, you need to see the house. It's bad. My heart sank as I drove to the Portland suburb, the familiar streets blurring past. When I pulled up, the sight hit me like a punch. My garden, my sanctuary of roses and lavender, was a war zone. Pots were smashed, their shards scattered like broken promises. Flowers I'd nurtured for years lay torn from the earth, roots exposed. Small trees I'd planted to shade the porch were snapped at the base. Susan had done this. I stood frozen, my chest tight, as the weight of her betrayal sank in. This wasn't just anger, it was deliberate. A calculated stab at what I loved most. I walked through the wreckage, my boots crunching on shattered clay. A neighbor confirmed it was Susan, seen ripping plants out in a frenzy the night before. My hands trembled as I picked up a broken rose stem, its petals crushed into the dirt. I'd spent years building this garden, a place of peace amidst her chaos, and she'd destroyed it to hurt me. Over $5. The rage boiled up, but so did the grief for the garden, for the mother I wished she could have been. I knew then I had no choice. Evicting them was the only way to stop this. I called my lawyer that afternoon, my voice steady despite the ache in my throat, and started the eviction process. It felt like severing a limb, especially knowing Dad would be caught in the fallout. But Susan had left me no options, and the ruins of my garden were proof she'd never stop. Filing the eviction papers felt like signing away the last piece of my family. The process was cold, mechanical, but necessary. I stood in my Portland apartment, staring at the legal forms, my heart heavy with guilt over Dad. Susan, though, had pushed me too far. Weeks later, the eviction notice was served, and Susan's reaction was a storm I'd braced for. She showed up at my place, pounding on the door, her screams echoing through the quiet street. "You ungrateful traitor!" she yelled, her voice raw with rage. "You'll pay for this, Emily!" I stayed inside, my pulse racing, refusing to open the door. I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed. They arrived quickly, escorting her away as she shouted threats, her words slicing through the night air. When I visited the house after they moved out, it was worse than I'd feared. Susan had scrawled hateful messages across the walls in black marker words like betrayer and thief glaring at me from the living room. Trash littered the floors, and the air smelled of neglect. I found a broken picture frame, a photo of us from years ago, shattered in the hallway. My throat tightened as I cleaned, scrubbing her venom from the walls, but the damage lingered. Dad called, his voice soft and broken, apologizing for her. He'd moved to a small apartment nearby, and I helped him settle in, though the weight of his sadness clung to me. Susan's chaos had torn us apart, and as I stood in the empty house, I felt both relief and a deep, aching loss. She was gone, but the scars she left were far from healed. A month after the eviction, I thought the worst was behind me. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed with a call from the Portland police. My stomach dropped as the officer's voice came through, calm but serious. "Your mother was caught trespassing at your property, Ms. Carter." Susan had been spotted lurking in the yard, peering through windows, pacing like a caged animal. A neighbor called it in, alarmed by her erratic behavior. When the police arrived, she was incoherent, ranting about how the house was hers, how I'd stolen it. They took her in for questioning, and I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, her threats echoing in my mind. "You'll never get rid of me," she'd screamed before. Now I believed her. The next day, my aunt Linda called with worse news. Susan's behavior had spiraled after the arrest. She'd lashed out at Linda, accusing everyone of conspiring against her. During a violent outburst, Linda took her to a hospital in Portland, where doctors admitted her to a psychiatric ward. They said Susan was alternating between rage and despair, her obsession with the house consuming her. Hearing she was in a psych ward hit me hard. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I pushed her to this? But deep down, I knew her actions weren't my fault. Relief crept in too, knowing she was somewhere she couldn't hurt herself or others. Still, the image of my strong-willed mother, now unraveling in a hospital bed, felt like a wound that wouldn't close. With Susan in the psychiatric ward, I turned my focus to healing the wounds she'd left behind. The Portland house felt like a ghost of itself, its walls still echoing her anger. I started with the garden, kneeling in the dirt under the Oregon drizzle, replanting roses and lavender where she'd torn them out. Each new sprout felt like a small rebellion against her chaos. Inside, I painted over the hateful words she'd scrawled, covering betrayer with soft beige, though the memory of them lingered. The house slowly came back to life, the air lighter, the rooms brighter. Yet, every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the battles fought here, and I wondered if it could ever feel like home again. Dad and I grew closer, meeting for coffee near his new apartment. His eyes carried a quiet sadness, but he never blamed me. We avoided talking about Susan, an unspoken agreement to let the past rest. I learned she was still in the ward, seeing a therapist, taking meds. Aunt Linda said she was improving, but I wasn't ready to see her. The hurt was too raw, the trust too broken. As I tended the garden, watching new buds bloom, I realized this was my way of moving forward, not just fixing the house, but reclaiming my peace. The scars Susan left would take time to fade, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was building something stronger than her destruction. Months passed, and the Portland house finally felt like mine again. The garden bloomed brighter than ever, roses climbing the trellis I'd rebuilt, but peace was fragile. One evening, my phone lit up with another call from the police. My heart sank as the officer explained. Susan had broken into the house again, smashing a window to get in. Neighbors saw her in the yard, tearing up plants, screaming my name into the night. When the police arrived, she was wild, dirt-streaked, clutching a broken rose stem. They arrested her for vandalism and trespassing, and this time, a psychiatric evaluation was mandatory. I drove to the house, my chest tight, and saw the damage my garden, painstakingly restored, was in ruins once more. At the station, I learned Susan's mental state had deteriorated further. The court didn't hesitate. She was committed to a long-term psychiatric facility outside Portland. The judge's words were final. She was a danger to herself and others. I stood in the courtroom, watching her led away, her eyes vacant, no longer the fierce woman I'd known. It broke my heart, but it also freed me. The house, my sanctuary, was mine now, no longer haunted by her rage. I walked through the garden the next day, the air heavy with loss but also hope. Susan was gone, maybe forever, but I'd rebuilt my life from her chaos. The house stood strong, a symbol of my independence, and I knew I'd keep moving forward, one step at a time.